Good morning. Barry Bryson here. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. We're studying the Gospel of Matthew, and we're going to be reading chapter 22, verses 34 through 40 today. This is the third question of the three that Jesus is going to have to answer. We have the unanswerable questions, framing this section that describes the confrontation that Jesus has with the authorities during that week between his triumphal entry and his crucifixion. And we had the three parables, and this is the third of the three questions that are asked. The first two questions represented the Pharisees and the Sadducees just taking their best shot at Jesus and trying to discredit him before the crowds. And Jesus just exercises his superpower. I mean, he just catches their punch in midair, and just lays it aside. And that superpower is the use of words of truth. And in a sentence, just dismisses what they think is an unanswerable question and answers it logically, truly, clearly for the masses of people, meaning you and me, to understand. And now I think we have somebody who is a really smart guy, an expert in the law, who recognizes that Jesus has this ability and so asks him a question. In Luke chapter 2, when Jesus is 12 years old and he's in the temple, he's at the great synagogue, he's in this space talking to probably some of these same guys who are older now, who are experts in the law. And I wonder if they remember him. Is this that 12-year-old that we knew, 20 years ago? Is this him all grown up? And he's doing the same thing, asking and answering questions. But now it's confrontational. And in Luke's gospel, in Luke chapter 10, this question is the prelude to the story of the Good Samaritan. And Jesus is the one who asks it, and asks it of a lawyer, and the lawyer gives the correct answer. And so this is information they already know. As he pointed out to the Sadducees yesterday when he says, have you not read? You already know this. You just haven't applied it. You haven't understood it. You haven't accepted it yet. But you already know it. And he's going to give them an answer that they already know to be true. He's just confirming it. So let's read this. Matthew chapter 22, verse 34. Now when the Pharisees had heard that he had put the Sadducees to silence, they gathered to himself. And one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question, testing him, Teacher, which is the great commandment of the law? And he said to him, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the great and foremost command. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend the whole law and the prophets. Well, this is a question to test Jesus, but he doesn't treat it like the other two. It is in no way as confrontational. That's why I call this an honest question. I think they really want to know how Jesus is going to answer it, and answer it in front of the crowds. Jesus has already asked this question of another lawyer at another time earlier in his ministry, and has said it was the right answer. And he gives exactly the same answer. The Jews, or at least the Pharisees, the rabbis, had identified 613 laws in the Old Testament that were the application of the Ten Commandments. But you can also notice in the Ten Commandments that they really are in two sections. The part that deals with God, and the part that deals our relationship with God, and the part that deals with our relationship to each other. And so they noticed that. They knew this already. And the thing that Jesus points out is that the word that joins the two together is love. We really can reduce the 613 to 10 to 2 to 1 word. And they're not going to ask him any more questions after he answers this question. We've talked about this passage or this notion before, that the greatest command, and let's just remind ourselves what we said. The relationship with God comes first. I mean, God gives us his law, and God gives us his blessings. God loves us, and God directs us. Apart from that love and direction, we are unable to maintain our relationship with each other. And therefore, if it's important to you, if it's important to me to be a good husband, a good father, a good friend, and a good employee, a good neighbor, a good whatever, the most important thing I can do first of all is to have a good relationship with God, because it's his direction and his love that are the two resources that will allow me to be that the way I need to be. And so that has to be first, but you can't separate them out. They are intertwined because God loves us, and God loves us equally. And if God loves me and he loves you and I don't love you, then I have a problem with God and I can't have a good relationship with God. And so loving our neighbor as ourselves is the second great command. That first great command, of course, is from Deuteronomy and the Shema, Deuteronomy chapter 6. Hear, O Israel, Yahweh is God, Yahweh is one, and you shall love Yahweh your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your mind. And so that was the confessional statement that they knew. The other is from Leviticus chapter 19, where we get the gleaning law and the law of how you treat strangers. And that's why it's the perfect place to go to when you want to talk about, how we treat someone in danger. So did I say earlier the parable of the prodigal son is the parable of the Good Samaritan in Luke chapter 10? I hope I did not misspeak when I talked about it, but it's a perfect place to connect to that parable because it's about the way you treat the foreigner who is in your midst. And so this is the correct answer. And they know it is. They've already answered it themselves, or at least one of their number has already answered it. And Jesus confirms that this is the truth, and they don't ask him any more questions. Well, Jesus has a question for them next time. We'll finish out chapter 22 when we're together again. This question has an answer to it, and it's a simple answer that you and I, with 20/20 hindsight, can't answer for ourselves. And if they would have just thought for a minute, they could have answered too. We'll talk about that next time. Thank you for joining me for 5 good minutes.